Frank Klose joins us now, our 97.3 ESPN Phillies Insider Philadelphia, and his Twitter handle at Frank Klose, and he's got the mailbag open today. Frank, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing well, guys. How about yourselves?
I got my Phillies shirt on after that Flyers performance last night. I'm ready to write them off, and let's go Phils.
Yeah, good for Mike getting out of here. I know some people stuck down there. Shame on them, huh? Right?
That's right. You got to. Once you're at 30,000 feet, the weather's fine, right? It's all just atmosphere up there.
Got that right.
So, Frank, the mailbag's open. We'll go through a couple of these questions as we do each week, and that's how it works. You, the listener, get on our website, 973ESPN.com. Look for Frank's articles on the Phillies and the Phillies mailbag, and what he'll do is you send a question to Frank on Twitter at Frank Klose, or you send an email to sportstalkphilly@gmail.com. Ask him your Phillies question. We tee him up, and then if it's a good question or even if it's an okay question, we read them out on the air here, and then Frank gets to answer them. So we'll start with Michael's question, Frank, and he says, where might the Phillies put their young starters? It does not appear that they have as many spots available as there are young arms in the system.
Yeah, what a great question, and what a great problem to have if you're the Phillies, right? So, the Phillies added Clay Buchholz as another veteran starter to go with Jeremy Hellickson. And that means of their young guys, they only can fit 3 of them. So the Phillies are probably going to have a AAA rotation, which is equally stacked. It looks like Jake Thompson and Zach Eflin, they're going to be tagged for the minor leagues. Now, it's worth noting, too, that both of them had some minor nagging injuries. So I suppose there's a chance that they're not ready to start the season, but if all's well and they continue to progress as they seem to have this week, they'll probably anchor the AAA rotation along with Mark Appel, and Alec Asher and Ben Lively are probably in that rotation too, but it's a shame because somebody like Nick Pivetta, who's probably good enough to be in AAA, is probably going to get bumped down to AA Reading so that he can start. And again, good problem to have. And so behind Pivetta, you have the likes of Drew Anderson, who impressed some people in camp. And El Neri Garcia is going to be down there, along with prospect Thomas Eshelman and Ricardo Pinto. You could also argue that he could be up for promotion soon, but he's going to have to be at AA. So really, the Phillies have a lot of starting pitchers for very few spots. And that might mean that somebody who still remains a prospect, like Mark Leiter Jr., he might have to start the season in the bullpen, but I think as we saw last year when Charlie Morton went down after just 4 starts, you might have to tap into that minor league depth right away, and that changes everything. So it's a good problem for the Phillies to have, and so they'll probably end up spilling some of their talent into a level below where it could be, just so that they can all get a chance to start.
Frank Klose with us. The Phillies mailbag is open. Phillies leading Atlanta right now in spring training. Steve wants to know about Daniel Nava. Does he have a shot at the big league roster?
Well, the short answer is yes. But as we were talking about last week, the Phillies really have one bench spot for somebody that can bat left-handed. Now, Daniel Nava is a switch hitter, but he's going to be up for that same position that the likes of Brock Stassi and Chris Coghlan are up for. Now, as we were talking about last week, Brock Stassi is having a really good spring training himself. Stassi was batting .407 going into today, and he ended up coming into the game today, and he has 1 hit so far, so that number is up a little bit, although I haven't done the math. But Nava, he also had a hit today, and he hit the 500 mark going into his last at bat. So both of them are playing very, very, very well. You could argue that both of those players really deserve it. And you could also argue that Chris Coghlan, due to his experience and his ability to play the infield, might also have a good shot. Now, Coghlan's batting about .227 at this point, so he's, in terms of spring training numbers, 2 of the 3 are doing very well, but I think we all know that often the spring training numbers don't mean a whole lot. But I think what's going to end up happening is what's going to determine that last spot might have a lot to do with how the rest of the roster shakes up. And there's really not many other positions kind of up for grabs. The backup catcher position is one that might play into this. Andrew Knapp, if you may have noticed, he's played some first base this spring, although it didn't go so great the couple times he played. But he's getting some experience there. So if they feel like someone like Andrew Knapp can jump in at first base, well, then they might feel more comfortable not having another first baseman besides Tommy Joseph. And at the same time, if Howie Kendrick, they feel that he's still able to play some infield and can jump into second base or third base if the club is in a pinch, well, then they might feel more comfortable having Stassi. And then beyond all of that, you still have to consider that if Stassi makes the team, they can send him down to the minor leagues. Daniel Nava, if they keep him on, they're going to have to probably release him if he's already on the major league level. So they might want the flexibility of Stassi. So right now, it's the answer to the question is yes. Nava certainly has a good shot. Pete McCannon was even singing his praises. Somebody who gives them professional at bats, even on today's broadcast. So yes, he's got a real chance. But how it shapes up isn't necessarily McCannon's decision alone, and the other positions might really decide just who ends up with that spot, and it's going to be a tough one.
Hey, Frank, you mentioned Brock Stassi, and my question has to do with, Nava, Stassi, Coghlan. All of them are currently not on the 40-man roster. So even if any of these guys make the 25-man, you're going to have to bump, theoretically, someone off the 40-man. So who would that person be?
Yeah, so our next question really addresses that. I mean, if you look up and down the Phillies 40-man roster, there's some really good young talent there, and there's not necessarily any clear-cut name that you think you could subtract next. Now, a year ago, you might have looked at it and said, okay, Michael Marriott, he's somebody expendable or along those lines. But this year, you just don't have that. And, last spring, we saw a couple 40-man roster spots opened up with injuries to the likes of Cody Ashe and Aaron Altair, who were both out for a while. Now, you don't want that to happen, but looking at this team, there's two names that look like they might be the first to go. One would be reliever Luis Garcia. I'm looking at the Phillies bullpen. They added two veteran right-handed arms in Pat Neshek and Joaquin Benoit. And you already have Jean-Marc Gomez and Hector Neris, and if you look ahead, Edobre Ramos was a nice addition down the stretch. So there might not be a spot in the major leagues for Garcia, and that might mean you don't have the ability to keep Garcia on your major league roster or your 40-man roster. So Garcia might be the one to go. He's the type of guy that might show up in the major leagues for somebody else down the line, but there he's kind of stuck. Might be stuck behind these young arms, and at 30 years old, he might be the one to go. And beyond that, probably the next name on the roster to look at would be Tyler Goeddel. And, the Phillies picked him as a Rule 5 player last year. He was on the major league roster all season like he was supposed to so that they could gain control. But it looks like right now Tyler Goeddel is getting pretty squeezed in terms of playing time. The major league roster is going to have Howie Kendrick in left, Odubel Herrera in center. And then in right field, of course, they signed Michael Saunders. So with those two veterans, you're looking at Aaron Altair being a backup, outfielder. I think he's ahead of Goeddel. You can only really keep one of the two, and I think Altair has a little bit of an advantage at this point. And that left-handed bat that we were just talking about. So there's no room in the major leagues. And then if you look down at the minor league, the AAA, you could be in a situation where you have in left field Nick Williams, center field Roman Quinn, right field Dylan Cousins. And there's not a starting spot for him there either. And they still have the likes of Cameron Perkins hanging around AAA. So, are you necessarily doing Tyler Goeddel a good service if he's stuck to AAA and not starting? So what they might be able to do, and this is what I might try to do if I were the GM, although they haven't given me that job, maybe you can work out a trade where you can trade Tyler Goeddel or somebody like him to another organization that has a more immediate need, and then maybe get some outfield depth lower in the system that doesn't need to be on the 40-man roster. So you're still getting value out of that position. It's you don't want to just cut Goeddel, I'm sure. I think if the Phillies tried to put him through waivers, he would be snatched right up. So it's going to be a little tough one for the Phillies, especially if they add that left-handed bat, which I think they need to do. So that's at least one spot. And if Andrew Knapp is not the reserve catcher, either Ryan Hannigan or Brian Holiday end up making the club, they're going to need to find a spot for them as well. So that actually might force the club's hand to keep Knapp as the reserve, even if they don't feel he's particularly ready. But because the 40-man roster is just jam-packed.
Frank Klose with us, answering the questions from Josh and from you, the listeners, in the Phillies mailbag. And you did kind of answer Ashley's question there about the 40-man roster and who gets cut. You mentioned Tyler Goodell, and you mentioned the Goodell tough situation. Just to confirm, the other name that you have in the article on our website on 973 is Luis Garcia. But go check out Frank's article on 973ESPN.com to find out more about the Phillies and the Phillies mailbag and how that system works. And then, of course, join us here on the Sports Bash each week, each Tuesday, as Frank comes in and gets with us on the Phillies mailbag. Frank, they signed my guy from Creighton, Pat Vendiette, the righty-lefty, lefty-righty.
Yeah, that's an interesting name, isn't it, huh? You know, I think my favorite thing about him was there was an Associated Press article where one local newspaper actually had the headline say that the amphibious pitcher made his debut. So I can't think of Pat Vendiette without thinking of that funny mistake. But yeah, ambidextrous player, definitely changed the rules of the game quite literally, because now you have to declare what arm you're going to throw with, and then you only have one other shot to change it in an at bat. So that's a really interesting situation that baseball found itself with. You know, that Pat Venditte is there throwing for both sides. I don't think he's got a shot for the Phillies roster right now because of that roster crunch, but it will be fun to see him at Lehigh Valley and see if he can put together some games and just be fun to watch.
Absolutely. No matter what he does in baseball, he'll always know, hey, they named a rule after me. It's Frank Klose, our 97.3 ESPN Phillies Insider, Philadelphia. You can follow him on Twitter closely at Frank Klose with a K, and follow him here on 97.3. Thanks, Frank. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.